A poor girl comes running into the hospital with a baby in her arms. Crying, she says, "My brother is freezing. I'm sorry. I tried to warm him with my arms." The doctors drop everything to help, but they're shocked when they see the baby's face. The automatic doors of the Riverside Memorial Hospital emergency room slid open with a hiss, letting in a burst of icy air along with the snow falling outside. Dr. Rachel Bennett looked up from the chart she was filling out and witnessed something she had never seen in 15 years of emergency medicine. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, staggered in carrying a bundle in her arms. Her bare feet left wet footprints on the hospital's white floor. Her light brown hair, tangled and partially frozen, framed a pale face with large, frightened eyes. "My brother won't wake up," she said in a voice so soft that Rachel had to lean forward to hear her. Time seemed to freeze for a moment before everyone sprang into action at once. Rachel dropped her clipboard and ran toward the girl. The sound of the metal hitting the floor seemed to snap the staff out of their initial shock. "I need a gurney here, now!" Rachel shouted, already kneeling in front of the child. The bundle the girl was carrying was a baby wrapped in a soaked blanket. The baby's skin had a worrying bluish tint, purple lips, and there was no visible movement of his chest. Rachel felt her throat tighten as she touched the child's icy skin. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Rachel asked, while two nurses approached with a gurney. "Abby," the girl replied, reluctant to let go of her brother. "Abby, this is your little brother. What's his name?" "Caleb. He's cold." Rachel tried to take the baby gently, but Abby clutched him to her chest. Her small fingers, red and showing early frostbite blisters, held the blanket with surprising strength. "Abby, I'm Dr. Rachel. I'm going to help your brother, but I need you to let go for a moment." The girl's deep blue eyes locked onto Rachel's, as if searching for something. Trust, perhaps, or a promise. "Will you make him warm again?" "I'm going to try with all my might," Rachel replied, holding her gaze steady. "I promise." Something in that promise seemed to convince Abby, who loosened her grip. Rachel carefully took the baby and placed him on the gurney, immediately checking his vital signs. Severe hypothermia, possible superficial frostbite on the extremities. "We need passive rewarming, thermal blankets, continuous cardiac monitoring," Rachel ordered as the team began to work. "Core temperature is, oh my God, 92.3 degrees Celsius. Prepare trauma room 3. As she spoke, Rachel realized Abby was still there, watching her brother being wheeled away. Her bare feet left small puddles on the floor, and she was visibly trembling. Rachel noticed spots of blood where the girl had stepped. "Nancy," Rachel called to one of the nurses, "look after Abby as well. She needs medical attention. Injured feet, possible frostbite, and she's definitely hypothermic too." Nancy approached Abby and held out her hand. "Let's take care of you too, honey." But Abby pulled away, her eyes following the gurney carrying Caleb. "I need to stay with him. I promised, Mom." Rachel paused what she was doing and turned her attention back to Abby. "I understand, Abby, but we can't help your brother if you get sick too. Nancy will take care of you, and I promise you can see Caleb as soon as we're making sure he's properly treated." Abby hesitated, her small body tense as a violin string about to snap. "Come with me, sweetheart," Nancy said gently. "We can see your brother from the next room. I'll give you dry clothes and something warm to drink." Still reluctant, Abby finally gave in and followed Nancy, though her eyes never left the direction Caleb had been taken. Rachel turned her full attention to the baby. Caleb didn't look older than a year. His skin was cold to the touch, but on closer examination, Rachel realized the frostbite was mainly superficial. With proper treatment, he had a good chance. "Where are the parents?" asked Dr. Miles, another physician who had joined the team. "I don't know yet. The girl, Abby, came with him alone." While the team worked to stabilize Caleb, Nancy took Abby to an adjacent room. The girl allowed them to examine her injured feet, but remained silent, watching through the window that looked into the room where her brother was being treated. "Abby, we need to call your parents," Nancy tried, while cleaning the cuts on the girl's feet. "They must be very worried." Mom went away. She's not coming back. The finality in the child's voice made Nancy look at her more closely. Abby wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry, as if the tears had frozen long ago, just like her hands and feet. "What about your dad?" Abby didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the room next door. Nancy offered Abby a dry blanket and a mug of hot chocolate, which the girl accepted with trembling hands. As she took her first sip, her eyes closed briefly, as though she absorbed not just the warmth of the drink, but also the first moment of comfort in a long time. An hour later, Rachel left the trauma room, exhausted but relieved. Caleb was responding well to treatment. His body temperature was steadily rising, and there didn't seem to be any permanent frostbite damage. That was when she found Abby, sitting in a chair in the hallway, staring at the door of the room where her brother was. "He's going to be okay," Rachel said, sitting down next to the girl. "Caleb's a fighter." Abby nodded slightly, but said nothing. "Abby, we need to know more about you and your brother. Is there anyone we can call?" The girl shook her head. That was when Rachel noticed something odd. Under the hospital blanket, Abby was still clutching something to her chest, a small purple backpack, worn and damp. "What do you have there?" Rachel asked gently. Abby hesitated before showing its contents: an empty baby bottle, a well-worn teddy bear, and a wrinkled photograph of a smiling woman holding a baby, with Abby at her side. "That's Mom," Abby explained, touching the photo carefully. "She told me to look after Caleb if she went away." Rachel felt a pang in her chest. Where did Mom go? "Heaven," Abby answered simply. "She got sick and went to sleep. She never woke up." Rachel swallowed hard, trying to maintain her professional composure. "And there was no one else with you? Maybe a dad, an uncle, an aunt?" "Tommy left after Mom slept. He said he'd come back, but he never did." "Is Tommy your dad?" Abby shook her head. "He was Mom's husband. He doesn't like it when I call him Dad." Rachel nodded, processing the information. A 6-year-old and a baby, alone after the mother's death and the stepfather's abandonment. It was a miracle they had survived. "How long has it been since your mom went to heaven?" Abby frowned, thoughtful. "Many nights. The food ran out. Then the lights went out. Then it got really cold. And how did you get here?" "Walking," Abby answered, as if it were obvious. "Caleb was really cold this morning. I remembered Mom said hospitals help sick people." Rachel tried to imagine it, a 6-year-old girl carrying a baby through the snow, probably for miles, barefoot and barely clothed. The thought made her stomach turn. "You were very brave, Abby," Rachel said, placing a hand over the girl's. To her surprise, Abby didn't pull away. "You saved your brother's life." For a moment, something like pride crossed the girl's face. But then it vanished, replaced by that same watchful expression. "Can I see him now?" Rachel hesitated. Caleb was surrounded by medical equipment, tubes and monitors, a sight that might scare a child. But Abby's determined look convinced her. "We'll go see him together, okay?" In the room where Caleb had been moved, Abby stood by the door, watching her brother. The baby was connected to several monitors, but his color had improved considerably. Abby slowly approached the bed and reached out, lightly touching his fingers. "He's warmer," she observed. "Yes, he's responding very well. He's strong, just like you." Abby kept looking at her brother, as if trying to take in every detail. "Can I stay here with him?" Rachel knew it was against hospital protocols, but she also knew separating the siblings right then would be cruel. "I'll arrange a bed for you right next to him, okay?" Abby nodded, visibly relieved. It was then that Rachel noticed something. The girl hadn't asked when they could go home, as if there were no home to go back to. Later that night, after Rachel made sure Abby could stay in the room with Caleb, she found the girl sitting in the chair by her brother's bed. Abby hadn't slept, despite her obvious exhaustion. Rachel brought a plate of hot food, macaroni and cheese, and a few pieces of chicken, and placed it on the small table next to Abby. "You need to eat so you can be strong," Rachel said. Abby looked at the plate with wide eyes. as if she had never seen so much food at once. "Can I save some for Caleb?" Rachel felt another twist in her heart. "Caleb's getting nutrition through that tube. See?" She pointed to the feeding line. "He's getting everything he needs. This food is just for you." Abby looked momentarily confused, but then she picked up her fork and started eating slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be her last. Rachel pulled up a chair and sat beside the girl. She knew she should go home. Her shift had ended hours ago, but something kept her there. Maybe it was the way Abby fought to keep her eyes open, determined to watch over her brother. Or maybe it was the mystery of these two abandoned children. "Abby, it's normal to feel scared after everything you've been through," Rachel began softly. "But you're safe here, and Caleb is too." The girl kept eating in silence. "If you want to talk about what happened, I'm here to listen." Abby finished her food and set the plate aside. Her eyes met Rachel's, studying her as if trying to decide whether she could be trusted. "We ran out of food," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I found some things in the fridge, but then it was all gone. I gave Caleb the last bottle yesterday." "You were alone in the house?" Abby nodded. "Tommy said he would get food, but he never came back. I tried to make the stove work to keep us warm, but I couldn't." "How long ago did Tommy leave?" Abby frowned, counting on her fingers. "Many days, before the snow got big." Rachel did some quick mental math. The first major snowstorm of the season had hit almost 2 weeks ago. The thought of 2 children alone for so long made her stomach sink. "And your mom, when did she go to heaven?" "Before it got cold. The leaves were falling," Abby described, probably referring to autumn, months earlier. "And no one else came to see you?" "No neighbor or family friend," Abby shook her head. "The house is far from other places. Mom said it was our secret spot." Isolated, with no nearby neighbors to notice 2 kids alone. Rachel felt a wave of anger at Tommy, wherever he was. "Do you know your mom's full name, Abby?" "Sarah." "Sarah Miller," the girl replied, touching the photograph she kept in the pocket of her hospital robe again. Rachel made a mental note. She'd need to contact social services in the morning, but for now, her priority was making sure Abby felt safe. "You were so brave to bring Caleb here. How did you know where the hospital was?" "Mom showed me once when we drove by. She said it's where people go when they need help." Rachel pictured the journey. A 6-year-old, guided by a distant memory, carrying a baby through the snow. "How long did you walk in the snow?" Abby shrugged. "It was light, then it got dark again. A full day. A small child walking a whole day in the snow to save her brother. You must be very tired, Abby. Why don't you try to sleep a little? I'll keep an eye on Caleb." Abby shook her head firmly. "I promised Mom I'd take care of him. And you did. You did really well. But even caregivers need rest sometimes." The girl seemed to consider this, but her eyes soon returned to her brother. "What if he wakes up and doesn't see me?" "I'll wake you right away if he shows any sign of waking up, I promise." Abby looked at Rachel for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could trust that promise. Finally, she nodded and settled on the cot that had been set up for her, eyes still fixed on Caleb. Rachel pulled the blanket over Abby and watched as the girl battled sleep. It was clear she had taken on the role of protector from a very young age, maybe even before her mother's death. "Rest, Abby. You and Caleb are safe now." The girl's eyes finally closed, though her body remained tense, ready to wake at the slightest threat. Rachel stayed seated between the 2 children, watching the monitors that showed Caleb's gradual recovery. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the footprints Abby had left during her desperate journey to the hospital. Rachel gazed through the window into the darkness dotted with white flakes, wondering what had happened in that isolated house. And more importantly, what would happen to these 2 children now? One thing she knew, she wouldn't leave their side anytime soon. There was something about this brave little girl and her baby brother that touched a part of Rachel she thought she had buried years ago, a need to protect, to care, to shelter. As she watched Abby finally surrender to sheer exhaustion, Rachel made a silent decision. These kids would not be alone again, not if she could help it. 3 days had passed since Abby and Caleb arrived at the hospital. The baby's condition was improving by the hour, his body temperature was stable, and his color had fully returned. The doctors were now monitoring his fingers and toes, concerned about potential frostbite damage, but so far it looked like Caleb would make a complete recovery. It was almost a little miracle, considering the state in which he had arrived. Rachel checked on the room more often than necessary. She had transferred several of her patients to other doctors, keeping only the most urgent cases plus Caleb and Abby. The little girl rarely spoke, but her eyes followed every movement of the medical team like a silent sentinel. "Good morning, Abby," Rachel said, entering the room that morning. "How are you both today?" Abby, sitting in her usual chair next to Caleb's adapted crib, only nodded. She was wearing new clothes, sweatpants, thick socks, and a red sweater Nancy had brought from the hospital's donation room. Her hair was combed and tied in a simple braid, yet she still looked oddly out of place, like a miniature adult trapped in a child's body. "Let's take a look at our little champion," Rachel said, moving toward the crib. Caleb was awake, his eyes, the same deep blue as his sister's, observing the ceiling with curiosity. When Rachel leaned over, he turned his head toward her, and for a moment he flashed what looked like a smile. "Look at that. I think he's flirting with me," Rachel joked. And to her surprise, she saw something close to a smile on Abby's lips. Rachel checked the baby's vitals and noted them on his chart. The neurological response was good, which was a relief. Sometimes severe hypothermia left lasting effects, but Caleb seemed to have escaped that. "Linda from Social Services is coming to talk to you this afternoon," Rachel commented, trying to sound casual. "She's really nice. She just wants to chat a bit, like you and I do." Abby's body visibly tensed. "They're going to take us away." "No, nobody's taking you away today," Rachel assured her. "Caleb isn't ready to be discharged yet, and besides, we need to make sure you both have a safe place to go afterward." Abby didn't look reassured. Her small fingers gripped the edge of her sweater. "You don't like talking to new people, do you?" Rachel asked gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. Abby shrugged. "Tommy didn't like it when I talked." Another piece of the puzzle, Rachel made a mental note to share this information with Linda. "Well, it's different here. We like to listen to what you have to say." "Why?" The simple question caught Rachel off guard. "Because you matter. What you think, what you feel, it all matters." Abby considered this, frowning as if deciding whether or not to believe it. "I'll come back later. I have a few other patients to see, but I'll be around if you need anything, okay?" Abby nodded, turning her attention back to her brother. Early in the afternoon, Rachel stopped in the hallway outside Caleb's room. Through the glass, she saw Linda Carter, the social worker, sitting next to Abby, speaking in a low voice. To Rachel's relief, Abby appeared relatively at ease, responding with nods or short words. Not wanting to interrupt, Rachel moved on, planning to return later. That was when her pager went off, an emergency in the ER. Racing there, she encountered a situation that took all her attention for the next few hours. A multi-car accident, with several victims arriving one after another. By the time she got a break, it was past 5 in the afternoon. Exhausted, Rachel allowed herself a few minutes in the doctor's lounge, sipping a strong cup of coffee. Her thoughts turned back to Abby and Caleb, wondering how the conversation with Linda had gone. Passing by the temporary office Linda was using, Rachel knocked softly on the open door. "May I come in?" Linda, a middle-aged woman with short grey hair and kind eyes, looked up over her reading glasses. "Rachel, please. I was just reviewing the notes on the Miller children." Rachel sat in the chair opposite the desk. "How did the talk with Abby go?" Linda took off her glasses and sighed. "She's reserved, as expected, but I managed to get some information. I confirmed that the mother, Sarah Miller, died about 3 months ago. Abby mentioned that she went to sleep and didn't wake up after being sick for a while. Any info on the stepfather?" "Thomas Rhodes, known as Tommy. From what I gathered, he married Sarah about 2 years ago, just before Caleb was born. Abby is not his biological daughter." Rachel nodded. That explained a lot. The relationship seems to have been strained, especially after Sarah's death. Abby doesn't say it outright, but there are signs of neglect even before he abandoned them. Were you able to figure out how long they were on their own? Linda checked her notes. From Abby's description, it seems Rhodes left the house 2 or 3 weeks ago, saying he'd be back. Apparently, it wasn't unusual for him to vanish for a few days, but this time, he never returned. My God, Rachel muttered, picturing the 2 children alone in that house for so long with winter setting in. I'm trying to locate Rhodes, but no luck yet. As for extended family, Abby mentioned a maternal grandmother who passed away before she was born. There don't seem to be any close relatives on the radar. What's the next step? Linda closed the folder. For now, they remain in temporary state custody while we continue the investigation. Once Caleb is discharged, we'll need to find a foster home for them. They need to stay together, Rachel said firmly. I completely agree. I'll do my best to ensure that, but you know how the system is. Homes willing to take both a baby and a 6-year-old at the same time aren't too common. Rachel felt her chest tighten. The idea of separating the siblings after all they had been through seemed too cruel. Thanks, Linda. I'm going to check on them before I head home. The hospital corridor was quieter now that the night shift had begun. The lights were dimmer, creating soft shadows on the walls. Rachel walked slowly toward Caleb's room, feeling the weight of the day on her shoulders. As she neared the door, something made her stop. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see Abby standing beside Caleb's crib. The girl didn't know she was being watched, and there was a naturalness to her movements that Rachel rarely saw when adults were around. Caleb had moved, and his hospital blanket was partly off. With a delicacy that seemed out of place for someone so small, Abby reached for the blanket and carefully tucked it around her brother. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic. First his feet, making sure they were covered, then the sides, leaving his arms free, and finally a small adjustment under his chin. Rachel stood there, transfixed. There was something deeply moving in the way those small hands moved, not just a big sister caring for her baby brother, but someone who had done this same gesture hundreds of times before. A routine that had become part of her. After adjusting the blanket, Abby remained still, just observing her brother. Her hand lightly touched the baby's head, fingers running through his fine hair with a tenderness that spoke of love and protection. It's okay, Abby whispered to her brother. You'll be better soon, I promise. Rachel felt a lump in her throat. In those simple words lay an echo, probably the same words Abby had repeated during the long nights alone in that cold house, trying to comfort a baby who didn't understand why he was hungry or cold. Finally, Rachel knocked lightly on the door before entering, not wanting Abby to realize she'd been observed in such an intimate moment. Hey, you two, she said softly. How are we tonight? Abby returned to her chair, resuming the vigilant posture Rachel already knew so well. But there was something different now, a slight relaxation in her shoulders, perhaps, a small concession to the safety she was beginning to feel. He's sleeping better, Abby commented. He doesn't cry at night. That's great, Rachel replied, stepping up to check on Caleb. The baby was indeed sleeping peacefully, just as Abby had said. Did you notice his fingers are warmer now? Abby nodded. I always checked his fingers at home. Mom taught me. She taught you very well how to care for him, Rachel said, sitting on the edge of the bed near Abby. I take care of him every day and ever since Mom went away, Abby said, staring at her own hands. It's my job. The simplicity of the statement hid a depth that cut Rachel to the core. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a life mission, taken on by a child barely starting her own life journey. You do a wonderful job, Abby, Rachel said, choosing her words carefully. But you know, kids your age aren't usually expected to handle that kind of responsibility alone. But there's no one else, Abby replied, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. There is now, Rachel said, before she could stop herself. Now there are other people who can help you take care of Caleb. Abby lifted her eyes, studying Rachel's face as if searching for signs of deception. For how long? The question, so direct and practical, said a lot about the girl's experiences. People left, or help was temporary, nothing lasted. I don't know exactly, Abby. But I promise we won't just send you back to an empty house. Abby nodded, not entirely convinced. Rachel realized that words meant little to a child who had probably heard many broken promises. Silence fell between them, comfortable in its own way. Rachel watched Abby looking at her brother, and she suddenly understood something fundamental about the girl. She defined herself by her ability to protect Caleb. It was more than sibling love. It was her identity, her purpose. "Can I tell you a secret?" Rachel asked softly. Abby looked at her, curious. Sometimes the people who look after others also need someone to look after them. Abby's eyes widened slightly, as if the idea had never occurred to her. In her world, she was the protector, not the protected. "Do you need that?" Abby asked, surprising Rachel with the question. Rachel smiled, touched by the unexpected concern. "Sometimes, yes. We all do." Abby considered this for a moment, then extended her small hand and, in a gesture that nearly made Rachel lose her composure, straightened the collar of Rachel's coat, which was slightly askew. It was such a small gesture, almost insignificant, but to Rachel it meant everything. It was Abby, the protector, widening her circle of care to include someone else besides Caleb, a first step toward trust. "Thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice slightly choked. Abby just nodded, as if to say, "You're welcome. That's what we do for others." Linda Carter parked her Honda Civic in the lot reserved for Department of Social Services employees. It was still early, just past 7 in the morning, but she wanted to arrive before the day's activities began. She couldn't get the Miller children's case out of her head ever since meeting Abby at the hospital. 25 years as a social worker had taught Linda to maintain professional distance, but also to recognize when a case deserved special attention. And this one definitely did. The building was almost empty when she entered, turning on the lights in her small office. The first thing she did was open her laptop and log into the state record system. She typed Sarah Miller into the search bar, knowing it was too common a name to get straightforward results. She'd have to refine. She added the city and approximate age range, based on what she knew from Abby. While the system processed the search, Linda opened the physical file she had started compiling. In it were her notes from conversations with Abby and Dr. Bennett. The system returned dozens of results. Linda sighed and began filtering them manually. She was looking for a Sarah Miller with a daughter named Abby, around 6 years old, and a son named Caleb, under 2. And ideally, a connection to a man named Thomas or Tommy Rhodes. After nearly an hour of methodical searching, Linda found what she was looking for. Sarah Ellen Miller, 29, married to Thomas James Rhodes 2 years ago. Mother of Abigail Miller, age 6, Dowis, and Caleb Rhodes, 14 months. "There you are," Linda murmured, clicking on the file to see more details. The system showed that Sarah had records with the Social Services Department, having received temporary food assistance after Caleb's birth. There were also medical records. Linda clicked on them, hoping to find information on the cause of death. And there it was. Sarah Miller Rhodes had been admitted to Pine Ridge Community Hospital, a small facility about 25 miles away, 3 months earlier with severe pneumonia. She died 2 days later, leaving the 2 children under the care of her husband, Thomas Rhodes. Linda kept reading. There was a note in the system, dated 6 weeks ago, where a neighbor contacted social services on suspicion of child abandonment. When the team arrived, Thomas Rhodes informed them that his wife had recently died and he was handling the situation. The visit was recorded as inconclusive, with a recommendation for a follow-up in 2 weeks. There was no record of any follow-up. Linda felt a wave of frustration and professional guilt. The case had fallen through the cracks. Someone should have returned to that house, checked on those children. But with overloaded teams and limited resources, it happened far too often. Continuing her search, Linda found more information on Thomas Rhodes. He was 34, had a history of temporary construction jobs, and 2 previous DUIs. Nothing that automatically disqualified him as a guardian, but enough to raise red flags, especially in light of the recent abandonment. Rhodes's last recorded employment was at a local construction firm 4 months ago. After that, nothing. No unemployment benefits filed, no new job. It was as if he had vanished off the radar. Linda wrote down the family's address. It was in a rural area called Carter's Mill, an old industrial district that had turned into a sparse community with houses far apart. She decided she needed to see the place for herself. Closing her laptop, she grabbed her coat and car keys. On the way out, she called Rachel. "Dr. Bennett." "Linda Carter. I found some information about Abby and Caleb's family. I'm on my way to check the property now. Thought you'd want to know." "Thanks for calling, Linda." Rachel's voice sounded tired, as if she hadn't slept much. "How are things?" "Not great, I'm afraid. Sarah Miller, the mother, died 3 months ago from pneumonia. The stepfather, Thomas Rhodes, appears to have abandoned the kids a few weeks ago. There was a social services visit after a tip, but for some reason, no follow-up." Rachel was silent for a moment. "It's hard not to be angry at the system sometimes." "I know how you feel," Linda replied. "I'm heading to the house to get a better sense of the situation. Shall keep you informed." "Please do. How are the kids this morning?" "Haven't seen them yet today, but the night nurse said they did fine. Caleb's getting stronger all the time." "Good. I'll be at the hospital in about an hour. We'll talk after your visit." "Definitely." Linda hung up and walked to the parking lot. Her car was old but reliable, like herself, she thought wryly. She set the GPS for the Miller Road's address and left. The road to Carter's Mill was narrow and poorly maintained. Linda drove slowly, avoiding potholes and watching the landscape become more rural. The houses grew farther apart, separated by patches of woodland and open fields. After about half an hour, the GPS indicated she was approaching her destination. Linda slowed down even more, looking for the house number. There was no orderly mail system in that area, just occasional mailboxes marking the entrances to properties hidden by trees. Finally, she saw a small handmade sign, "Miller." The driveway was just a dirt trail branching off from the main road. Linda turned in and followed it, feeling the car jostle as she advanced slowly. After about 200 yards, the trail opened into a small clearing where a one-story wooden house stood. The white paint was peeling, and the tiny front porch had a broken board. In the yard, there was an old swing hanging from a tree and some scattered toys, now partially covered by snow. Linda parked and sat for a moment, observing the house. The solitude of the place was oppressive. The nearest house had to be at least a mile away. It was no wonder no one had noticed 2 small children alone. Stepping out of the car, the silence hit her. The only sounds were the wind in the trees and a distant creaking, probably a loose window or a rusty hinge. Linda approached the house with a growing sense of apprehension. The front door was locked, but Linda knew she needed to check inside. As a social worker with legal authorization in suspected child abandonment cases, she took out a basic lockpick set, a sad necessity in her line of work. After a few minutes of attempts, the lock gave way. Linda pushed the door open, which creaked loudly. The smell was the first thing that hit her, a mix of mold while rotting food and the unmistakable odor of a house that hasn't seen cleaning or fresh air in weeks. Linda covered her nose and mouth with her coat sleeve and stepped in. The living room was in a state of controlled chaos. There were children's toys neatly stacked in one corner, clearly Abby's doing, but the rest of the space showed signs of abandonment. Old newspapers were scattered. An empty whiskey bottle lay next to the couch, dirty dishes on the coffee table. Linda pulled out her phone and began taking methodical photos. Each image would serve as evidence in the custody process that now seemed inevitable. The kitchen told an even more disturbing story. When Linda opened the refrigerator, she found only a few items: a gallon of milk turned solid, rotting vegetables in the bottom drawer, and a few cans of beer. In the cupboard, there were empty cereal boxes, as if someone had tried to extract every last crumb. Some canned goods, beans, corn, soup, were lined up on a shelf, all partially opened and empty. Linda imagined Abby, so small, trying to reach those cans, opening them with difficulty, rationing the contents for herself and her brother. On the counter, there was a baby bottle with traces of powdered formula still inside, next to a small saucepan. Without electricity, Abby probably couldn't heat the water properly for her brother's milk. Linda continued her examination, moving on to the bedrooms. The first was clearly the master bedroom, with an unmade double bed and clothes scattered on the floor. There was a strong smell of cigarettes and several empty liquor bottles on the nightstand. Linda opened the drawers. Most were empty, suggesting Tommy had taken his belongings before leaving. The next room was small, with 2 beds. One was clearly Abby's, covered with a faded princess comforter and some stuffed animals neatly arranged on the pillow. The other bed was smaller, more like a makeshift crib, with side railings made of boards tied to the bed frame. On it lay a tiny mattress covered by several layers of blankets, but next to this improvised bed, Linda found the scene that struck her most: a small child's chair, perfectly positioned, with an open storybook on it, as though Abby had spent hours sitting there, watching her brother sleep. In the small closet, Abby's clothes were folded with surprising care for a 6-year-old. Caleb's clothes were equally organized in a plastic bin. Linda noticed there were very few pieces, especially concerning given the harsh winter. Moving on, Linda found the bathroom. The tub had marks of recent use, with a small toy bucket next to it, likely used by Abby to fetch water when there was no electricity to pump it. There was an almost empty bottle of baby soap and a towel hanging still damp. Returning to the living room, Linda noticed a detail she had missed before. On the wall, several framed photographs. Most showed a young, pretty woman, Sarah, Linda assumed, at different moments with Abby. In some more recent photos, there was also the baby Caleb. Thomas Rhodes appeared in only a few images, always with a distant expression. One photo in particular drew her attention. It seemed recent, probably taken a few months earlier, showing Sarah sitting on a chair on the porch, Caleb in her lap and Abby by her side. They were all smiling, but Sarah looked pale, already showing signs of the illness that would take her shortly afterward. Linda felt her eyes fill with tears. In her years of work, she had seen many difficult situations, but the resilience shown by Abby, a 6-year-old child caring for a baby in an isolated house in winter without heat or proper food, was both extraordinary and devastating. She took a few more photos, then sat on the couch for a moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in. The silence of the house seemed to amplify the absence of its inhabitants, especially the children who, against all odds, had survived there for weeks. Before leaving, Linda spotted something under the couch, a small notebook. Picking it up, she saw it was some kind of diary, written in the awkward scrawl of a child learning to write. On the first page, in large, uneven letters, Abby Miller. Linda hesitated before looking further. It was something private, but it might hold important clues about the children's situation. Deciding it was necessary, she flipped through a few pages. Most contained drawings, stick figures representing Abby, her mom, and baby Caleb. Some had dates written on top, showing that Abby had kept the notebook updated even after her mother's death. The most recent entries were mostly tally marks, vertical lines grouped in sets of 5, as if Abby were counting the days. On the last used page, there was a simple drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands, labeled ABY and Kale, walking toward a large building Abby had labeled as hospital. Below, in uneven letters, Caleb, very cold, we go get help. Linda closed the notebook and carefully placed it in her bag. It was another piece of the puzzle, further confirmation of the story Abby had told, and of the incredible maturity and courage she had shown. Before leaving, Linda took one last look around the house. It was hard to imagine any child growing up happily in such an isolated place, especially during those chaotic final months. And yet, there were signs of love, the photos on the wall, the neatly arranged toys, the care Abby showed her brother. Locking the door behind her, Linda made a mental note to arrange for someone to come back and collect the children's personal belongings, especially the photos, which would be crucial in maintaining their connection to the past. Back in the car, she took several deep breaths before starting the engine. The emotional impact of visiting the house was strong, even for someone with her experience. Now she fully understood the situation, and her determination only grew stronger. Abby and Caleb deserved much more than that abandoned house. They deserved a real chance at normal childhoods, with adults who genuinely cared. Linda pulled out her phone to call Rachel but hesitated. Instead of simply reporting what she had seen, she decided it would be better to show her. Taking out her phone again, she selected some of the most telling photos from the house and sent them to Rachel with a simple message. "Visit done. Confirms everything Abby said. The house is completely abandoned. We'll talk when I get back. The kids can't go back there." While driving back to the city, Linda couldn't get the image of that little chair beside the makeshift crib out of her head, or Abby's drawing of carrying her brother toward the hospital. It was an image of helplessness, but also of incredible strength. And in that moment, Linda made a professional and personal decision. She would do whatever it took to make sure Abby and Caleb never again had to rely solely on each other for survival. Rachel turned on the radio in her car as she drove home after another long hospital shift. The soft music playing was just background noise to her thoughts, which remained firmly fixed on Abby and Caleb. A week had passed since the children arrived at the hospital. Caleb's progress was remarkable. The doctors had removed most of the monitors, and he was now in a regular room sharing the space with his sister. Abby, for her part, stayed vigilant, but she had begun to trust the staff more, especially Rachel. Stopping at a red light, Rachel looked up at the night sky. The snow had taken a break, and a few stars were visible through the scattered clouds. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she'd had with Linda Carter earlier that day. "We're looking for a temporary home for them," Linda had said. "But I won't lie, finding a foster family that will take both kids together is challenging." Rachel knew what that meant. The foster care system was overloaded, and many families preferred to foster babies like Caleb, leaving older children like Abby in group homes. The thought of separating the siblings was unbearable, especially given all Abby had done to keep her brother alive. The light turned green, and Rachel kept driving. Instead of turning right toward her apartment, she impulsively drove straight ahead, taking the longer route along the lakeshore. She needed time to think, and driving always helped clear her mind. When she finally arrived at her apartment, Rachel felt physically and emotionally drained. She dropped her bag on the couch and walked to the window overlooking the city. The lights in other buildings glowed in the night, each one representing other lives, other stories. Almost without realizing it, her fingers found the small locket she always wore around her neck, hidden under her blouse. She removed it and looked at the delicate silver piece, opening it as she had done countless times before. Inside, a date was engraved, 06-17, followed by tiny baby footprints. Rachel felt the familiar lump in her throat. 6 years ago, almost 7. She had been 32 at the peak of her career as an ER doctor and 4 months pregnant. It hadn't been planned. Her relationship with James wasn't even that serious, but from the moment she saw that first ultrasound, she knew she wanted the baby. Then, on a normal day in June, the pain started. Pain she recognized immediately as a doctor. By the time she reached the hospital, it was too late. "These things happen," her colleagues had said, trying to comfort her. "There was nothing you could have done." Rachel knew that rationally, but emotionally, the loss devastated her in ways she never expected. James tried to be supportive, but the relationship didn't survive the grief. 3 months later, he took a job in another state, a mutual relief disguised as a painful separation. The locket was a gift she'd given herself on what would have been the baby's due date, a way to remember, to acknowledge that that tiny life, however brief, mattered. Rachel closed the locket and tucked it back under her blouse. Something about Abby touched her profoundly, beyond professional compassion or admiration for the girl's bravery. It was as if, somehow, Abby represented the daughter Rachel had never had the chance to know. "Ridiculous," Rachel muttered to herself, walking into the kitchen to make some tea. She already has a mom. She had a mom. But as the kettle boiled, the images Linda had sent from the Miller house came flooding back. The small chair by the makeshift crib, the notebook of drawings, the empty cupboards, the way Abby had assumed responsibilities no child should ever have to. The kettle's whistle snapped her out of her thoughts. Rachel prepared her tea and took the mug to her bedroom. On her nightstand was a stack of charts she'd meant to review, but instead she picked up her tablet and began browsing social services websites and foster care requirements. 2 hours later, her tea was cold and untouched, but Rachel had made a decision that, in some way, felt inevitable from the moment she saw Abby carrying Caleb through the snow. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. She stopped at the cafeteria and bought hot chocolate and a blueberry muffin. She'd noticed it was Abby's favorite, before heading to the children's room. As she approached the door, she heard a sound that made her stop. Laughter. Not a restrained chuckle or a polite smile, but genuine, carefree, childish laughter coming from inside the room. Peeking through the window, she saw Abby sitting on the bed with Caleb, showing him a picture book one of the nurses had brought. The baby clapped enthusiastically, and Abby laughed every time he did. For a moment, Rachel just watched, not wanting to interrupt that rare moment of unburdened joy. They were just two kids playing, as they should every day, not a 6-year-old carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Finally, she knocked lightly on the door and entered. Abby's smile faded slightly, a conditioned reflex Rachel had noticed whenever an adult walked in, but it didn't disappear entirely. "Good morning, you two," Rachel said cheerily. "I brought hot chocolate and a muffin for a certain young lady I know." Abby's eyes lit up, but she glanced at her brother before accepting the treat. "Can Caleb eat muffin too?" "He likes it when I give him little pieces." Rachel smiled, noting how Abby always thought of her brother first. "I think a little piece without the berries is fine, but let's check with the nutritionist later. Okay, he's starting solid foods again." Abby seemed satisfied with that answer and took the muffin, immediately separating a tiny piece for her brother. Rachel sat in the chair beside the bed, watching the interaction between the siblings. Caleb opened his mouth like a little bird, trusting fully that his sister knew what was best. The bond between them was almost tangible. "Abby," Rachel began, choosing her words carefully, "you and Caleb are feeling better now, right?" The girl nodded, licking a bit of frosting off her fingers. "Soon, Caleb will be ready to leave the hospital, and you will too." Abby's body went tense immediately, her eyes seeking Rachel's, full of apprehension. The unspoken question hung between them. Where would they go? "Linda, the lady who talked to you, is looking for a good place for both of you. A place where you can stay together and be safe. Can't we go back home?" Abby asked in a small voice. Rachel gently shook her head. "No, sweetheart. The house isn't safe for you now, especially with no grown-ups around." Abby lowered her head, taking in the information. She didn't seem surprised. She probably already knew they couldn't go back, but the confirmation was still hard. "Are they going to separate us?" The question came out almost as a whisper. "No," Rachel replied firmly. "Linda and I are working to keep you together. I promise." Abby studied Rachel's face, trying to see if this was just another empty adult promise. Rachel held her gaze, letting Abby see her sincerity. "Actually," Rachel continued, "I had an idea. How would you feel about staying at my place for a while? I have an extra room that could be for the two of you." Abby's expression was indescribable, a mixture of hope, mistrust, and fear of believing. "Why would you do that?" she finally asked. The question caught Rachel by surprise, not because Abby doubted, but because of her perceptiveness. At 6 years old, she already understood that adults usually have reasons for what they do. Rachel could have given a professional answer, talked about temporary foster care, transition periods, the kids' well-being. But looking into Abby's blue eyes, so much like the ones she imagined her own child would have had, she decided on the truth. "Because I care about you both, Abby. Because I think you and Caleb deserve a safe place to stay. And because—" Rachel hesitated, feeling a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself. "Because I know what it's like to feel like something important is missing inside you." Abby's eyes widened, as if she recognized something in that confession. "Did you lose someone too?" she asked softly. Rachel nodded, surprised by the girl's perceptiveness. "Yes, someone I never really got to know but still miss." Abby thought for a moment, then placed her small hand on Rachel's, a surprisingly comforting gesture, especially coming from a child. "Sometimes," Abby said slowly, "when I really miss Mom, I close my eyes and remember when she hugged me. It helps a little." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. Somehow, this little girl who had lost so much was now trying to comfort her. "That's really good advice, Abby. Thank you." Caleb chose that moment to clap his hands again, breaking the emotional moment. Abby smiled at her brother and then looked back at Rachel. "Does your house have a yard?" The question was so unexpectedly normal, so purely childlike, that Rachel laughed. "Yes, it has a small yard, and there's a park nearby too. Caleb likes to look at trees and birds. We get plenty of birds near my place," Rachel assured her, "and the windows are big, so he can watch them." For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Abby seemed to truly relax, as though part of the weight she carried had been momentarily lifted. "I need to talk to Linda first, sort out a few things," Rachel explained. "But I think in a few days, once Caleb is discharged, you can come home with me if you want." Abby looked at her brother, who was now happily playing with a loose thread on his blanket. "I think we'd like that," she finally said. That night, when Rachel came by to check on the children before heading home, she found a scene that would remain etched in her memory. Abby, finally, in a deep sleep. Since arriving at the hospital, the girl had only slept in restless dozes, always waking at the slightest noise, always on guard. But now she was completely relaxed, breathing softly, one arm protectively extended toward Caleb's crib, where he was also sleeping peacefully. Rachel adjusted Abby's blanket and spent a long time watching the two children. Caleb's monitor showed stable vitals. He was officially out of danger. Abby's feet, once injured from walking through the snow, were almost fully healed. Physically, both were recovering. Emotionally, it would be a longer journey, especially for Abby. But for the first time, Rachel felt a deep certainty that they would be okay. She pulled up a chair and sat between the two beds. There was no real need for her to stay. Her shift was over, the nurses were on duty, and the children were stable. But something kept her there, watching the peaceful scene. Rachel recalled the conversation she had with Linda earlier that day, after expressing her intention to take the kids in temporarily. "Are you sure about this, Rachel?" Linda had asked, concern evident in her voice. "I know you've connected with these children, but it's a big responsibility, especially with your workload." "I've never been so sure of anything," Rachel answered. "I can adjust my schedule, work mostly day shifts while Abby's in school. And to be honest, Linda, I think I need this as much as they do." Linda had observed her carefully, then nodded. "I'll start the process. It'll take a few days to get the foster paperwork through, but given the circumstances and your position as their doctor, I believe it will be approved quickly." Now, sitting in the quiet hospital room, Rachel reflected on that conversation. It was true, she needed this as much as the children did. She needed the chance to care, to protect, to help heal wounds that went beyond the physical. Abby stirred slightly in her sleep, mumbling something inaudible before settling back down. It was the first time Rachel had seen her truly at peace, without the constant tension of responsibilities beyond her years. A wave of fierce protectiveness welled up inside Rachel. These children had endured losses no child should face. They had shown a strength few adults possessed. They deserved a chance, a real chance, to just be kids for a while. And maybe, just maybe, by helping them heal, Rachel would also find healing for her own wounds. The loss she carried had turned, over the years, into a void she could never fully fill. Not with work, not with relationships, not even with the occasional satisfaction of saving lives in the ER. But looking at Abby and Caleb now, Rachel felt something shift inside her. A thaw, much like the one Caleb had experienced, like a part of her that had been cold and numb for so long, was slowly coming back to life, regaining warmth and feeling. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, difficult times. Abby carried traumas that would take time and possibly therapy to heal. Caleb, though too young to remember, would also need stability and security. But in that moment, watching the two children sleep, Rachel knew with a conviction that went beyond logic that she had found something she didn't know she was searching for. A chance to make a difference not only as a doctor but as a person. An opportunity to transform past pain into something new and full of possibilities. Rachel adjusted Abby's blanket one more time and gently touched Caleb's little hand. Then she leaned back in the chair, deciding to stay just a bit longer, storing this moment of peace in her memory. Tomorrow there would be paperwork to fill out, arrangements to make, a room to prepare. But tonight, there was only this: two children sleeping safely, and a woman who had finally found a purpose beyond her profession. Rachel closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to fully feel the change taking place inside her, a change as profound as it was gentle, like the first snowfall of winter silently transforming the landscape. Sergeant Mike Davis looked out the window of the police station and saw Linda Carter's car pull in. He sighed, knowing the conversation that was coming wouldn't be pleasant. He took a last sip of coffee and walked to the entrance to meet her. "Linda, thanks for coming so quickly," he said, opening the door. "Did you find him?" Linda asked bluntly, stepping into the small building that served as the town's main station. "Yes, in a bar on the outskirts of the highway. Apparently, he's been sleeping in the back storage room for the past few weeks, doing odd jobs in exchange for booze and a place to sleep." Linda shook her head. "What's the situation now?" "See for yourself," Mike said, leading her down the corridor to the interrogation room. Through the observation window, Linda saw Thomas Rhodes seated at a metal table. His hair was disheveled, his beard unkempt, and his clothes looked like they hadn't been changed in days. Even from behind the glass, she could sense the smell of alcohol. "Is he sober enough to talk?" Linda asked. "More or less. We managed to get him to understand we found the kids. He asked if they're alive, so that's something, I suppose." Linda took a deep breath, bracing herself. "All right, let's go." Mike opened the door and they entered. Tommy looked up, red-eyed, frowning. "You're not a cop," he said to Linda, his voice hoarse. "No, Mr. Rhodes. I'm Linda Carter, from Child Protective Services. I'm handling your children's case." "They're not my kids," Tommy muttered. "Just Caleb is, and I'm not even sure about that." Linda felt a stab of anger, but kept her face neutral. Professionalism above all. "Mr. Rhodes, Abby and Caleb were found nearly 2 weeks ago. Abby managed to carry her baby brother to the hospital after days alone at home, without proper food or heat, in the middle of winter." Tommy shrugged. "Smart girl. I knew she'd figure something out." The casualness of the response made Linda clench her fists under the table. "Mr. Rhodes, you abandoned 2 small children. That's a crime." "I didn't abandon anyone," he protested, sitting up in his chair. "I went looking for work. I told Abby I'd come back. You left over 3 weeks ago." "Lost track of time," Tommy mumbled, staring at the table. "Things has got confusing after Sarah died." "Confusing how?" "Look, I didn't ask for this, okay?" Tommy raised his voice. "Sarah and I were fine, just the 2 of us. Then she shows up pregnant, and there's the girl who never liked me. Then Sarah gets sick, and suddenly I'm stuck with 2 crying kids all the time." "So you decided to leave?" Mike interjected. "It wasn't like that." Tommy slammed the table. "I was going to come back. I just needed some air to find some money." "And where's that money?" Linda asked. Tommy looked away. "I had setbacks." "Setbacks in the shape of a bottle, I imagine?" The man didn't answer. Linda opened her folder and laid out some photographs on the table. Images of the house, showing the condition in which the children had been left. "Do you have any idea what they went through?" Caleb almost died of hypothermia. Abby, a 6-year-old, had to care for a baby alone, with no food, no heat, no help. Tommy glanced briefly at the photos before looking away again. "Not my fault. If the neighbor had checked in like he promised." "Don't try to shift the blame," Linda said firmly. "You were the legally responsible adult for those children." "I never asked for that responsibility," Tommy exclaimed. "Never wanted to be a dad. Sarah knew that when we got married." Then she died and left me with this dual problem. That problem is two innocent children, Linda said, her voice cold. Two children you vowed to care for when you married their mother. Tommy rubbed his face with trembling hands. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I'm not a monster. I just can't. I don't know how to do this. Be a dad. Take care of kids. Then why didn't you get help? Social services, family, friends, anyone? Because, he hesitated, a moment of clarity flickering. Because I'd have to admit, I failed. Failed Sarah. Failed the kids. Failed myself. Silence settled in the room for a few moments. What happens now? Tommy finally asked. Mike answered. You're being charged with child abandonment and neglect. It's serious, Mr. Rhodes. Am I going to jail? That depends on the judge. But I can tell you, you won't have custody of those kids anymore, Linda said. We've already started the process to terminate your parental rights. Tommy almost looked relieved. They okay? The kids. They're recovering, Linda replied, not wanting to give too many details. They'll remain in state custody until the process is concluded. Tommy nodded slowly. That's best. They deserve someone better. For a moment, it was the first sensible thing he had said, Linda thought. Mr. Rhodes, is there anything else we need to know? Anything about the children or Sarah that might be relevant? Tommy seemed to think for a moment. Sarah had a box with documents, photos, family stuff. It's in the top cabinet in the kitchen. Abby should have it. Linda made a note. Thank you for that information. I'll make sure it's retrieved. Leaving the interrogation room, Linda felt a mix of anger and sadness. Thomas Rhodes wasn't the monster she'd imagined, just a weak man unable to handle the responsibilities life threw at him. In some ways, that made it all the more tragic. What do you think? Mike asked as they walked down the corridor. I'm recommending permanent termination of parental rights, Linda replied, and I hope the court agrees. Those kids need stability, not empty promises. Stepping out of the station, Linda inhaled the cold air and looked at the sky. The hardest part would be explaining all this to Abby, explaining that the man who should have cared for her and her brother simply couldn't. But that could wait. For now, the kids were safe, and that was what mattered. Rachel looked around her living room with a critical eye. There were stacks of medical journals in the corners, a half-wilted plant on the windowsill, and a decor that could best be described as functional. This space had suited her needs for years. A place to sleep, grab a coffee, and occasionally watch a movie before passing out. But now, imagining Abby and Caleb there, the apartment felt inadequate, cold, impersonal. What am I doing? She muttered to herself. The temporary foster placement had been approved with surprising speed. Linda expedited the process, and Rachel's professional background smoothed the way. But now, just 2 days from bringing the kids home, doubts were creeping in. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Linda. Hi, Linda, I was just thinking about you. I hope good thoughts, Linda replied lightly. I got that box Tommy mentioned. It has some important documents, birth certificates, some old photos, the kids' vaccination records. I thought you might want to see them before I submit everything to court as evidence. Sure. I'll be at the hospital in an hour. Perfect. And Rachel, how are you feeling about Friday? Rachel paused. Honestly, terrified. Linda chuckled softly. Welcome to parenthood. Nobody's ever truly prepared, not even those who plan for years. Is that supposed to be comforting? It should show you your doubts are completely normal, Linda replied. See you in an hour. At the hospital, Rachel found Linda in a small conference room near pediatrics. On the table was a decorated metal box, the kind people use for keepsakes. Sarah seemed to be very organized, Linda commented, opening the box. Everything is carefully labeled. Inside, there were folders with documents, envelopes with photographs, and some personal keepsakes, a baby shoe, a lock of hair in an envelope labeled Abby's first haircut, a hospital bracelet from Caleb's birth. Rachel handled the items carefully, feeling as though she were intruding on someone's private memories. These were precious mementos Sarah had saved for her children. "I found something that might be important for you to see," Linda said, handing a folder to Rachel. Inside were medical documents, records of Sarah's final illness, pneumonia, complicated by a pre-existing lung condition. The notes indicated she had sought treatment late, likely due to inadequate insurance. By the time she was hospitalized, the infection was too advanced. "She tried to treat herself at home," Rachel murmured, reading the doctor's notes. "Probably to save money. And to avoid worrying the kids," Linda added. From what Abby said, Sarah kept up their normal routine until just a few days before she was hospitalized. A mom trying to protect her children to the very end. Rachel felt a tightness in her chest. Abby hadn't just witnessed her mother's death, but likely her silent suffering for weeks. "Rachel," Linda said gently, "I know you've decided to foster the children temporarily, but I want you to know there's another option if you're interested." Rachel looked at her, intrigued. "Tommy's parental rights will almost certainly be terminated, considering the documented abandonment and neglect. Once that happens, the children will be legally available for adoption." Rachel felt her heart race. "You're suggesting that I'm not officially suggesting anything," Linda clarified quickly, "just presenting all the possibilities. Foster care can last up to 12 months, sometimes more. But eventually, we'll need to find a permanent home for Abby and Caleb." Rachel fell silent, absorbing the information. Adoption. It was a far bigger step than she had initially considered. "You don't have to answer now," Linda continued. "In fact, it's better that you see how fostering goes first, see what daily life with the children is like. Adoption is, well, it's forever." "Forever," Rachel repeated softly. "Think about it. No rush." That night, Rachel had dinner at the hospital with Abby and Caleb. She brought food from a nearby restaurant, macaroni and cheese for Abby and veggie puree for Caleb, who was now eagerly eating solid foods. "In 2 days, you're coming to my place," Rachel said, helping Caleb with a spoonful of puree. "I'm getting everything ready for you." Abby, who had been quiet throughout most of the meal, looked at Rachel curiously. "What's your house like?" "It's an apartment, not too big. It has 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a small balcony where we can see the park." "Do you have a TV?" Abby asked. Rachel smiled. "I do." "Can we watch cartoons? Tommy didn't let me much." "Of course you can, within reason, of course." Abby seemed pleased with that answer. She finished her macaroni and then took out something from her small backpack, a notebook and colored pencils one of the nurses had given her. "Can I draw?" "Sure," Rachel replied, surprised at the request. It was the first time Abby had shown interest in drawing since arriving. While Rachel finished feeding Caleb, Abby focused on her drawing, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Occasionally, she glanced at Rachel and Caleb before returning to the paper. When she was done, she turned the notebook to show her drawing. 3 stick figures, 1 big and 2 small in front of a rectangle presumably representing a house. Above the figures, Abby had written in childlike letters, "Abby, Caleb, Rachel." "That's us," she explained with rare shyness. "At your house." Rachel felt warmth spread through her chest. "That's a beautiful drawing, Abby. Can I keep it?" Abby nodded, carefully tearing out the page and handing it to Rachel. "So you remember." "Remember what?" "Your promise. That we'd stay together." "I'd never forget that promise," Rachel replied, folding the paper carefully and placing it in her bag. "It's really important to me, too." Caleb, who had been watching them closely, suddenly clapped his hands and made a sound that sounded very much like Abby. Abby's eyes widened. "He said my name." "Sounds like it," Rachel replied, equally surprised. "Caleb," Abby exclaimed, leaning toward her brother. "Say it again, Caleb. Abby." "Abby," the baby repeated, more clearly this time, followed by a delighted giggle. Abby's eyes sparkled with pride. "He only ever said Mama before. He never said my name." "You're very important to him," Rachel commented. "He knows who always cared for him." Abby smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed her face. For a moment, Rachel saw the child Abby could be, free from the constant burden of adult responsibilities. Later, back at her apartment, Rachel pinned Abby's drawing on the refrigerator. It was a simple, domestic gesture, something she'd never done before. Her apartment had always been a practical space, not a repository of memories, but now, looking at those three stick figures, Rachel felt something change. The apartment no longer felt so empty or impersonal. It was as if Abby's drawing had brought with it a promise, one of laughter, tears, messes, and life. Rachel walked through the apartment again, but this time with different eyes. The second bedroom, once an improvised office, now had two beds, one child-sized for Abby and a crib for Caleb. There were stuffed animals on the shelf, children's books on the nightstand, and a star-shaped lamp that projected constellations on the ceiling. In the living room, a basket of toys sat in one corner. In the kitchen, colorful plates and cups had been added to the cabinets, small changes that turned an adult space into a home for children. Sitting on the couch, Rachel picked up her phone and looked at Linda's number. The conversation about permanent adoption still echoed in her mind. It was terrifying, yes, an enormous responsibility, no question. But looking once again at the drawing on the fridge, Rachel felt an unexpected certainty. This apartment had been just a place to sleep for a long time. Now, for the first time in years, it was starting to feel like home. Rachel smiled to herself. Sometimes difficult choices had surprisingly clear answers. On the night before the court hearing, Rachel spread the documents out on her kitchen table. Linda had handed her a folder with all the paperwork for the adoption process, forms, reports, evaluations. While the children slept in the next room, she meticulously reviewed every page. When she reached the section about the children's family background, Rachel abruptly stopped. There it was, Abby's mother's full name, Sarah Elizabeth Miller, born Thomas. "Sarah Thomas," Rachel whispered, feeling a shockwave course through her body. It couldn't be a coincidence. Sarah Thomas, the same Sarah who had been her best friend all through school, with whom she'd shared secrets, teenage dreams, and plans for the future. The same Sarah she lost touch with after they took different paths, Rachel to medical school, Sarah to a nearby town with a boyfriend her parents disapproved of. With trembling hands, Rachel opened her laptop and searched for an old folder of scanned photos. It took a few minutes, but she finally found it. A picture of them at 17, arms linked, identical smiles for the camera on high school graduation day. The resemblance between Sarah and Abby was unmistakable now that she knew what to look for. The same intense blue eyes, the same face shape. Even the slight tilt of the head when concentrating. "How did I not see this before?" Rachel murmured to herself. She returned to the documents with fresh eyes, taking in every detail about Sarah's life. After school, Sarah had married young, had Abby, divorced. Then she met Tommy Rhodes, remarried, had Caleb. Then pneumonia, which took her far too soon, leaving 2 children behind. Rachel felt tears streak down her face. All those lost years, all those stories never shared. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, Sarah's children had found their way to her. "I'll take care of them, Sarah," she promised aloud. "With all my heart." At that moment, her decision to adopt Abby and Caleb took on an entirely new dimension. It was no longer just about offering a home to 2 needy children. It was also about honoring the memory of someone who had once meant so much, an unexpected link to her own past. The county family court building looked even more intimidating that morning. Rachel adjusted the collar of her navy blue dress, checking once more that she had all the paperwork in order. "You okay?" Linda asked, noticing her anxiety. "So you seem more nervous than yesterday." Rachel hesitated a moment before deciding to share. "I found out something last night. Sarah, Abby, and Caleb's mother. She was my best friend in high school. We lost touch for years, and I never knew she had kids or was living nearby." Linda's eyes widened. "My God, Rachel. That's extraordinary." "I'm still processing it," Rachel admitted, but it explains, somehow, the immediate connection I felt with the children, especially Abby. Judge Simmons will find that significant, Linda commented. It's not just a coincidence, it's almost like these children were meant to find you. Before they could continue talking, the courtroom doors opened. Tommy Rhodes was escorted in by an officer, looking more presentable than usual, but still uncomfortable in a borrowed suit that was too big. A few minutes later, everyone stood for the entrance of Judge Loretta Simmons, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression and kind eyes. We are here today for the custody and adoption hearing of Abigail Miller and Caleb Rhodes, she announced, shuffling the papers before her. Ms. Carter, please present the case. Linda rose, her posture professional and confident. Your Honor, this case involves two children, Abigail Miller, age 6, and Caleb Rhodes, age 16 months, who were found in a state of abandonment and neglect after being left alone by Mr. Thomas Rhodes, Abigail's stepfather and Caleb's biological father. Methodically, Linda presented the evidence: photographs of the abandoned house, detailed medical reports of the children's conditions when they arrived at the hospital, testimonies from neighbors. Abigail, demonstrating extraordinary courage and maturity for her age, carried her baby brother for miles in the snow to get medical help, potentially saving his life. Our investigations show this was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of neglect that began after the children's mother, Sarah Miller, passed away 3 months prior. The judge listened carefully, occasionally taking notes as Linda laid out the case. Over the past 2 months, the children have been under the temporary care of Dr. Rachel Bennett, who is now petitioning for permanent adoption of both. The follow-up reports, home visits, and psychological evaluations are all included in the file, and they all indicate an exceptionally positive situation. After Linda finished, the judge turned to Tommy. Mr. Rhodes, what do you have to say about these accusations? Tommy stood awkwardly. I'm not contesting anything, Mom. I know I messed up bad. After Sarah died, I couldn't handle it. Those kids deserve better than what I can give. Are you aware that terminating your parental rights is permanent and irrevocable? Yes, Ma'am. I signed the papers voluntarily. It's best for everyone. The judge nodded solemnly, then turned to Rachel. Dr. Bennett, I'd like to hear your reasons for seeking to adopt these children. Rachel stood, feeling a swirl of emotions following last night's discovery. She took a deep breath before beginning. Your Honor, I met Abby and Caleb under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. As an ER doctor, I witnessed their arrival at the hospital, Abby exhausted and hurt, carrying her nearly unconscious brother. From that moment, I felt an unexplainable connection to these kids. Rachel paused, gathering her thoughts. In the 2 months they've been in my care, I've seen remarkable changes. Caleb's, who arrived with severe hypothermia, is now a healthy, smiling baby. Abby, who took on unimaginable responsibilities for her age, is slowly relearning how to be a child. The trauma they've been through will take time to fully heal, but each day I see progress. Her voice broke slightly as she continued. Last night I discovered something extraordinary. Sarah Miller, the children's mother, was my best friend in our youth. We lost touch years ago, and I didn't even know she'd moved here or had children. This discovery only strengthens my decision. Surprise was evident on the judge's face. That is quite an unusual circumstance. Yes, Your Honor, I feel there is more than coincidence in our meeting. That maybe I was meant to look after them, not just for them, but to honor the memory of someone who once meant a great deal in my life. Rachel felt tears well up, but she continued steadily. I have the resources, the stability, and most importantly, the love to offer these children. I can't imagine my life without them now. I'm fully aware of the challenges ahead, especially the emotional support Abby will need in the coming years. But I'm committed to this path with all my heart. The judge considered her words for a moment. I'd like to speak with Abigail. Is she here? Yes, Your Honor. She's waiting in the next room with a social worker, Linda replied. A few minutes later, Abby entered the courtroom, looking small and vulnerable in her light blue dress. Her eyes darted around the room, pausing briefly on Tommy before fixing on Rachel, as though seeking safety. With kindness, the judge talked to Abby, asking about her life at Rachel's place, about Caleb, about school. The girl answered in short, honest sentences. "And how would you feel if Dr. Rachel became your mom?" the judge finally asked. Abby was silent for a moment, her eyes meeting Rachel's across the room. "My mom is in heaven now," she said quietly, "but I think she'd like Dr. Rachel. She takes care of us like my mom did." After the brief interview, Abby got down from the chair and, instead of returning to the social worker, she ran straight to Rachel, holding her hand tightly. Rachel could feel the slight tremble in the girl's fingers and squeezed them gently in return. The judge watched their interaction before gesturing for everyone to sit again. She reviewed the documents for several minutes in silence as the room waited. Rachel's heart pounded, Abby's hand in hers serving as an anchor. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I'm ready to give my decision," the judge announced at last. "In cases like this, my primary duty is to determine the best interests of the children." She adjusted her glasses before continuing. "Regarding the termination of parental rights for Thomas Rhodes, the evidence of neglect is clear and uncontested. Mr. Rhodes has also expressed his willingness to relinquish those rights. Therefore, I hereby terminate all parental rights of Thomas James Rhodes with respect to Caleb Rhodes and any legal authority over Abigail Miller." Rachel felt Abby squeeze her hand even tighter. As for the adoption petition filed by Dr. Rachel Bennett, this court typically follows a longer process. However, the circumstances of this case are truly exceptional. The previously unknown connection to the birth mother, the children's remarkable progress in her care, and the unanimous recommendation of social services convince me that immediate stability is in Abby and Caleb's best interests. The judge paused meaningfully. "Therefore, I grant the adoption petition effective immediately. Dr. Rachel Bennett is legally recognized as the adoptive mother of Abigail Miller and Caleb Rhodes. Adoption certificates will be issued by the clerk's office in the coming days." The sound of the gavel echoed in the room, sealing the decision. Rachel felt a surge of emotion so strong she could barely breathe. Abby stared at her with wide eyes. "Does that mean we get to stay with you forever?" Rachel knelt down to be at Abby's eye level, holding her small hands. "Yes, sweetheart. Now we're an official family. You, me, and Caleb, forever." Abby stayed still for a moment, as if processing the information. Then, in a gesture that surprised Rachel, the girl threw her arms around her neck in a tight hug, the first one since they'd met. "Thank you," Abby whispered in her ear. Rachel hugged her back, tears in her eyes. Over Abby's shoulder, she saw Tommy being led out of the courtroom. He paused briefly at the door, looking back one last time. His expression was complicated. Sadness, relief, maybe even a hint of gratitude. Then he gave Rachel a small nod before leaving. Linda approached, holding the final documents. "Congratulations, Rachel. Or should I say, Mom?" Rachel laughed, still hugging Abby. "I guess we'll figure out what to call each other as we go. The important thing is that we're together now." "Sarah would be happy," Linda said softly. "I'm sure of it." "Yes," Rachel agreed, feeling that a circle she hadn't even known was incomplete had now closed. "I think she would." As they left the courtroom, Rachel carrying Caleb and holding Abby's hand, she glanced up at the clear winter sky. Somehow, somewhere, she felt that Sarah was seeing it all and smiling. "Careful with that box, it's got fragile items," Rachel called out, juggling a child's backpack in one hand and holding Caleb in the other arm. It was a sunny Saturday in March, one of those perfect days that seemed to herald spring. The snow had finally melted, and tiny green buds were starting to appear in the flower beds of the park across from the building. To Rachel, it felt right. A new beginning for all of them. The children's official move into her apartment had happened informally 2 months earlier, as a temporary arrangement. But now, with the adoption finalized, Rachel wanted to mark the occasion. They had spent the week painting the kids' room, a soft blue on the walls, with white clouds that she and Abby had drawn together. Caleb helped too, mostly by creating little handprints in paint along the lower wall, which Rachel decided to keep as a special memory. Mike, on the building's doorman, opened the door for them with a grin. "Lovely day for a move, Dr. Bennett." Or should I say the Bennett family? Rachel smiled. They hadn't decided on last names yet. That was a conversation she planned to have with Abby when the time was right. For now, the official document still listed Miller and Rhodes, but Rachel didn't mind. Names were just labels. What mattered was the bond they were building. "Thanks, Mike. This is the last load from their old place. Just a few personal items Linda retrieved for us." In reality, it was more than a few items. Rachel had insisted on collecting anything that might hold sentimental value for the kids. Every photo of Sarah, some special toys and favorite clothes, and the keepsake box Sarah had kept. She wanted Abby and Caleb to have access to their previous memories, to know their story didn't just start now. Entering the apartment, they found Abby meticulously arranging a collection of children's books on the new brightly colored shelf in the living room. "We brought the last treasures," Rachel announced, setting Caleb down on the newly placed activity mat in the center of the room. Abby looked at the box curiously. "What's in there?" "Some things from your old house. Want to see?" The girl hesitated, as she always did when the past was mentioned. Then, with a small nod, she stepped closer while Rachel placed the box on the couch and began opening it carefully. "Look, Abby, these are your mum's photo albums." Abby's eyes widened at the sight of 3 leather-bound albums, her name embossed on the covers. She touched the one labeled Abby with tentative fingers. "Can we look?" she asked in a low voice. "Of course. They're yours. You can look at them whenever you want." They sat together on the couch, Abby in the middle, the album open on her lap. Caleb crawled over, curious, and Rachel pulled him onto her lap. The first page showed Sarah pregnant, beaming at the camera with her hands on her belly. The next was Abby as a newborn, tiny and red, cradled in her mother's arms. "This is you on the day you were born," Rachel said softly. "Your mum looks so happy." Abby nodded, touching the photo gently. She always said it was the happiest day of her life. Page after page, they saw Abby growing up, her first birthday, first steps, playing in the park, dressed up for Halloween. In a few photos, a man appeared who Rachel assumed was Abby's biological father, though he disappeared from the pictures when Abby was about 2. In the more recent photos, Sarah looked thinner, paler, but her smile while holding the newborn Caleb was radiant. "I remember that day," Abby said, pointing to a picture of her holding her brother for the first time. "Mom said I was the best helper in the world." "And you are," Rachel confirmed, stroking the girl's hair. "Caleb is so lucky to have you as a sister." They continued flipping through the photos for a while, with Abby occasionally sharing little stories about the moments captured. Rachel listened intently, storing every piece of information, every memory Abby was willing to share. When they reached the last page, Abby closed the album slowly. "Can we keep it in my room? I want to show Caleb when he's older." "Of course. We'll find a special place for it." The following weeks brought a routine that gradually began to feel natural. Rachel had rearranged her shifts at the hospital so she could be home mornings and evenings, hiring a trusted babysitter, Elaine, a retired lady from the next apartment, to watch Caleb during the day and look after Abby after school. Mornings were a whirlwind of packing school lunches, searching for missing socks, and trying to keep Caleb from redecorating the entire kitchen during breakfast. Rachel found she loved the chaos. It was so different from the sterile order that had defined her life before. One Tuesday, about 3 weeks after the official move, Rachel was in the kitchen making dinner when she heard a sound that made her pause. Laughter. Not just a little giggle or polite chuckle, but a genuine, uncontrollable, childlike laugh coming from the living room. Peeking through the kitchen door, she saw Abby lying on the rug, laughing uncontrollably as Caleb crawled over her, trying to grab a toy she was holding above her head. "No, you silly," Abby giggled, while Caleb babbled and tried to climb her like a mountain. "You have to ask nicely." The scene was so normal, so perfectly typical of two children at play that Rachel felt a lump in her throat. All these months since meeting Abby, she had never seen her so completely carefree, so present in the moment without the constant weight of responsibility beyond her years. Rachel stood still, not wanting to break the spell. Eventually, Abby gave Caleb the toy, and he immediately stuck it in his mouth, causing his sister to roll her eyes dramatically. "Everything is a snack for you," Abby scolded him, in a perfect imitation of an exasperated adult. Noticing Rachel in the doorway, she grinned, a wide, genuine smile that lit up her face. "He thinks everything is food," Abby explained, with the seriousness of a child who's become an expert on babies. "Well, he is growing," Rachel answered, stepping into the living room and sitting on the floor with them. "How was school today?" Abby shrugged, but without the usual tension accompanying questions about school. "It was okay. We did a bean experiment in science class, and Mrs. Martinez said my family drawing was really pretty. Can I see it?" Abby nodded and got up to fetch her backpack. Meanwhile, Caleb abandoned his toy and crawled purposefully toward Rachel, using her legs for support as he tried to stand. "Look at you, standing all by yourself," Rachel exclaimed, while Caleb grinned proudly, showing off his 4 little teeth. "Soon you'll be running all over the place." Abby returned with a piece of colored paper. "Here. The teacher said we can do it however we want, because families are different." The drawing showed 3 figures under a big yellow sun. One tall with long brown hair, clearly Rachel. One shorter with braids, Abby, and a tiny one in blue overalls, Caleb. Above them, in colorful letters, was written, "My family." "It's beautiful, Abby." "Can we put it on the fridge?" Abby nodded, looking pleased, while Rachel pinned the picture to the fridge with colorful magnets next to other artwork and doctor's appointment notes. She thought of how that simple rectangle of metal had become a collage of their life together. April arrived with frequent rain and longer days. Rachel had Abby and Caleb establish small traditions: pancakes on Sunday mornings, movie nights on Fridays with popcorn, bedtime stories every evening. At the local playground, Rachel started to meet other parents, transitioning from a single ER doctor to mother of 2 attracted curious looks and occasional questions, but she learned to handle them naturally. "Adoption?" one mother asked one day, while they watched Abby go down the slide. "That's unusual, isn't it? Taking in 2 kids at once, being single with a demanding career." Rachel smiled, watching Abby help a smaller girl climb the slide steps. "Actually, it was the most natural decision I've ever made. Sometimes families form in unexpected ways. At home, the changes were subtle yet meaningful. The office Rachel rarely used had become a bright and cozy play area. The fridge, once almost empty except for takeout leftovers, was now stocked with fresh food, yogurt cups, and juice boxes. The shelves that used to hold only medical textbooks were now filled with a chaotic mix of children's books, novels Rachel finally had time to read, and parenting guides. One particularly stormy night, Rachel woke to the sound of thunder. She glanced at the clock, 2:18 a.m. By habit, she got up to check on the kids. Opening their bedroom door quietly, she expected to find Abby awake. Storm still made her nervous, an echo of her nights alone in that cold house. But what she saw made her stop in the doorway. Abby was standing beside Caleb's crib, who slept peacefully despite the storm's noise. With careful movements, she was adjusting the blanket around him, making sure he was well covered. It wasn't the gesture of a caregiver forced by circumstance, but the tender touch of a sister who loved her little brother. Rachel watched silently, not wanting to interrupt. Abby finished tucking the blanket and gently brushed a strand of hair off Caleb's forehead. "It's okay," she whispered to him. "It's just noise." Noticing Rachel in the doorway, Abby turned. She didn't seem surprised or embarrassed at being caught. She just gave a small smile. "He moves a lot when he sleeps," she explained, moving to her own bed. "The blanket always falls off." Rachel approached, helping Abby climb under the covers. "You're a wonderful sister, you know that." Abby nodded seriously. "Somebody has to look after him." "Hey, still little." "And who looks after you, Abby?" Rachel asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. The girl thought for a moment, her eyes meeting Rachel's in the dim light from the star-shaped nightlight. "You do," she finally answered. Then, as if she'd had an important revelation, she added, "And I look after you too, right? Like when I remind you to bring lunch to work." Rachel smiled, touched by the observation. "Yes, you look after me too. That's how families work. Everyone cares for each other." Outside, the rain kept falling, but the thunder was moving away. Rachel adjusted Abby's blanket, echoing the little girl's gesture moments earlier with Caleb. "It's not cold here, Aunt Rachel," Abby said sleepily, her eyes starting to close. "Not on the inside." The simplicity of those words hit Rachel harder than she expected. She remembered that first night at the hospital, Abby exhausted and injured, yet determined to protect her brother, the bare feet and frozen hands, the watchful eyes that never really shut. "No, sweetheart," Rachel replied, her voice slightly choked. "It'll never be cold here." Abby smiled before drifting back to sleep, her body relaxed in a way that only comes when you feel completely safe. Rachel stayed there for a while, listening to the children's gentle breathing. On the wall, the star projector cast tiny points of light, like a private sky watching over the three of them. 3 months ago, this apartment had been just a place to sleep between shifts. Now it was undeniably a home, littered with scattered toys that always needed picking up, with little handprints on the windows, with daily laughter and tears and small moments of discovery. Rachel had spent years building a career, earning professional respect, saving lives. It was important work, and she still did it with dedication. But here, sitting between 2 sleeping children on a stormy night, she found a different kind of healing. Not just for Abby and Caleb, but for herself. Finally getting up, Rachel gently tucked the blankets one more time and walked quietly to the door. Before leaving, she glanced back at the sleeping silhouettes that had transformed her world in unimaginable ways. "Good night, my loves," she whispered. In her own room, Rachel didn't go back to bed right away. Instead, she stood at the window, watching the rain fall over the sleeping city. She thought of Sarah, her childhood friend, the mother who had first loved these kids, and felt a connection that transcended time and loss. "We're okay, Sarah," she murmured into the night. "All of us." For the first time in many years, Rachel Bennett felt complete, as though a part of her that had been dormant for so long was finally awake. She wasn't just a doctor, or just a woman, or just a long-lost friend, reunited by an extraordinary twist of fate. She was all that and more now. A mother, a protector, the center of a small universe that revolved around Sunday pancakes, school homework, bedtime stories, and warmth that came not only from well-tucked blankets, but from hearts that had finally found their place. Outside, the rain began to ease up, and Rachel smiled at her reflection in the dark window. She was home. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.